Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. Stuff from our last recording, but this seems to be pretty prescient as far as time, even though it's probably going to still get posted a little bit late unless you kind of change up your schedule. We post a second episode tomorrow. Tomorrow, Wednesday, July 13th, something interesting is going to happen, according to you. I'm not sure if this is also from an article, but it's expected that inflation is I don't even know all these words. I know what inflation is, but it's going to be an 8.8% inflation print.
So Wall Street has their expectations of 8.8% inflation, which is pretty high still. And there was a whole talk last year about how inflation was just going to be transient, and certain people like Larry Summers, who's kind of like I would say like an influential economist for the Democrats, was saying that, no, this isn't transitory. You need to actually plan for it. You should cut back some of the spending. This is going to be a real issue. It's basics, basic economics, economic 101. And that's kind of proven to be the case. So it's a lot of this, as we've said here, like whether it's directly or indirectly, I think a lot of it is driven by energy prices and the corporations of those in the supply chain, some of the fragmentation in supply chain. And it just, everything involves energy. So prices haven't really gone down per se.
Right.
But
well, let's break it down some. Even though I think I know what inflation is. In fact, I'm going to give my guesstimate. I don't have dictionary.com or anything open right now to tell me, but my understanding is inflation is where it's going to cost more, or whenever inflation goes up, whatever percentage it goes up, that's how much more it's going to cost to get the exact same thing you're currently getting. So if inflation goes up 10% and you're usually paying $1 for a candy bar, it's now going to cost $1.10 for that same candy bar. Would that be a decent definition? Yeah,
definitely. So it's basically the amount of money needed to buy the same goods goes up, and
we're expecting it to increase by 8.8% tomorrow.
No, that's the year over year. But usually, so that the central banks, at least the ECB, so the European Central Bank, and the U.S. So the U.S. has what they call the dual mandate, which is price stability, so stable inflation, target at 2%, and then economic employment stability. So, and in recent years, people have kind of said or accused or rightly said that they kind of almost have a third mandate, which is maintaining asset prices at an elevated level. There's been a lot of discussions over the years, but there was one big paper that from the Federal Reserve. They have a bunch of economists on staff, and a group of them wrote a paper saying that the Fed should really have a single mandate, which is price stability, and purely be focused on that. What we've seen is a lot of issues. If you have inflated prices, basically your buying power goes down,
right? And
it creates a lot of issue on kind of like stable business conditions. Some people aren't getting hit by it right now. Like some larger companies can use hedge contracts for commodities. Like if you're Frito-Lay or a big company like that, Delta, you can uh, originate basically option contracts or hedging contracts with like Wall Street banks, whoever counterparty wants to participate in that with you, and essentially lock in financially your ability to maintain a certain price for a certain period of time on your balance sheet. Those are really useful, but for ordinary people, when prices go up, your buying power falls, and you're basically paying the more for the same or less amount of goods, and that kind of has a tendency to ripple through the economy.
So now, is that how inflation is calculated, or is there another method? Because it seems like you mentioned a lot of different factors. So I'm trying to wrap my head around it, and I have a feeling you're about to say no. There's a whole lot more.
Well, inflation, I think, is one of those good examples of when people gripe about the inefficiency of government. It's this. So basically, I don't know, they have like 1,000 or 1,500 or something like that. I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot of people, and they're in these different cities all over the nation. And they basically, their job is to go around and do surveys of like grocery stores and used car dealerships and stuff like that. So they basically ask questions on prices and plug it into their iPad, and it gets rolled up somehow, and we have your inflation number. But if you realistically, like if I saw on LinkedIn a while back, someone posted it was basically a trend line in prices for the commoditized goods over the last 18 months. Mm-hmm. So they had it broken out by like grain, oil, gas, etc. And most of these things are up 50%. So is it really only 8.8? Like, I think a lot of people think it's much higher, and it's just a really, I would say, old way of doing things. Like we're in 2022. All of these prices are connected to central, like, kind of clearing or pricing systems. With the unemployment reports, you have basically the household survey, which the government runs, and then you also have the ADP, which is the processing technology company that puts out like an unemployment number too. And that's more the way that you'd think it would work, is basically working with and potentially paying these, whether it's like a Kroger or whatever like that, store like that, to get access to local pricing for foods, especially on the food stuff, where they can compare the basket of goods in more real time and just make it easier, So I really don't understand why they do it in such a manual. And I think it's one of those examples of where the manual aspect probably provides a lot of bias and lag in the actual calculation of what the state of the economy really is.
Now, I think I heard most of it, and I don't think I blinked out, but say that again, of like what you would expect for like Kroger or these grocery stores and stuff, like what their responsibility is. It, if I heard correctly, you're saying they would report the data?
Well, so all that data is in data feeds right now.
Okay.
And there's typically like standard, whether it's a USP or whatever, there's standard numeric elements for goods and services. So the products that people are buying. And you could, like, the Fed could basically just connect to a bunch of those data feeds and segment them automatically by different cities, and have a mathematical model that could just ingest that stuff without the need for people walking around and asking questions and stuff.
Now, I don't have a problem with that personally, but I would be curious, would that be seen, it seems like the people I know that run businesses, the ones that were like, let's not close down for COVID, that they would consider that's government overreach, or
we
that
pay them.
it's a regulation kind of thing, that they're just regulating us again and stuff. Is that not an accurate, or would that be, I mean.
So if I run like a grocery store, for instance, you're operating on very, very low margins.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I could basically get more money from the government to provide them with a data feed that already exists, essentially.
Okay.
Well, like I just think it's a better way to really track what the real pricing is.
Oh no, I completely agree. I'm just thinking of what some of the people I know, that they'd be like, the government just wants to, it's big government's trying to get me on the grid and stuff like that. And I know, like you said, it's already out there. It's one of those things, and I promise this will tie back into it, but it's like when people get on social media and they're like, the government's tracking everything you put on the internet. And I'm like, okay, then so is Google, Facebook, Apple, whoever, everybody's tracking you. If you have an electronic, you're pretty much already tracked. But I mean, good for you for posting that thing up on Facebook every 6 months saying you refuse to share any of your information with Facebook while sharing all of your information with Facebook.
Yeah.
Now, I won't lie. There's two words that I hear a lot when studying history, and I kind of understand one of them. The word that I don't understand is one I think we're going to talk a little bit more about, depression and recession. And the depression, I mean, the Great Depression that happened in the late 20s and early 30s, which was worldwide. I mean, there's like kind of a smaller depression of sorts around 2009 and 2010. I don't quite understand the differences between depression and recession. And maybe if you're on the bottom layer, it's the exact same thing. Yeah. And it only is the top layers that it really seems to be effective. But could you maybe describe like what the differences are? And then I'll have some follow-up questions with that.
Well, I don't know if there's actually like a economic definition for what a depression is. But it's, I mean,
all right. Well, there we go.
So it's when things hit the fan, the world's on fire, I guess. And so there's a Great Depression, and then there's also the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis. Those are kind of like the terms for the two basically depressions that I know. And I like, unlike a recession, there's not really a rule of thumb as far as I'm concerned, or
okay,
have knowledge to.
So a recession has rules to it?
A recession is commonly known by everyone except for a certain group as 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And that's, so that's, really? So that's basically a recession is when the economy is contracting.
Okay. That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
But now I'm just thinking of all the fear mongering that I've read in newspapers and seen on the news all my life. Go ahead and continue, please.
So it's pretty much like a mathematical understanding that's pretty transparent. The official definition of recession is very different, though. So
that's probably why I've got it mixed up.
So you have the recession that everybody who's anybody acknowledges as 2 negative quarters of GDP. That's basically governed by, like I think what the Federal Reserve prints. So we contracted in Q1, Q2. The Atlanta Fed runs a GDP model, and they've been predicting about a negative 2% growth during Q2. So that number comes out later. It's lagged, but kind of the assumption right now from a lot of people is that we're in a recession. At least the people that I think are kind of pretty knowledgeable about that.
Right.
It's obviously, I would say, if it's going to be a recession, it's going to has the potential to get a lot worse. It also has the potential to not be bad. So it's kind of a great example of a lot of these times we don't really know necessarily where the economy goes, but we're just so driven by consumer psychology and spending power, especially in the US. Consumption is such a big component of GDP that if that consumption really goes out, then we could be in dire straits.
So 2 negative quarters of GDP is what generally is a consensus.
Yeah.
You said that almost everybody agrees with that. So what are those who don't agree with it? What would they say a recession is?
So the official government acknowledged recession is the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, I believe, where like Harvard is, and MIT. They have a group there that basically gets to decide when you're in a recession or not.
Oh, okay. Well,
so when they declare that you're in a recession,
it is now recession time. The recession has ended.
So it's kind of like, a lack of government transparency there. I'm not really, actually, I don't think that there's really a rule of thumb where, like what goes into them making that determination. Like it's, recessions can be the worst of times for people and also the best of times for people. So usually these things are pretty fractured.
It's why things are negative would seem to be by going that first definition. So my sports mind is looking at, so a recession in a sense is kind of like rebuilding years for a sports franchise. Doesn't mean everything is bad. It's just the winning. It's not enough winning.
Yeah. Or you overspent the salary cap and now everybody is on free agency and you had to let them go. So,
I kind of wish that this is how it was described to me. Like, even, I mean, I read a bunch, but when I read about the recessions and stuff, I'm just like, man, we're just really horrible at managing. But I mean, when you think about it, like you could have a really great year, or a great quarter by using this definition. So maybe first quarter of 2022 was -10, and then the second quarter was -1, whatever it's getting measured. And even though we've done tremendous growth, we've almost to the point of breaking even, it's still considered a recession by this definition, right?
Well, so it would contract 10 in Q1 and then an extra 1% in Q2. So you'd basically be having the economy contract 2 quarters in a row. So essentially get smaller.
Okay, so it's almost like 11% then instead of 10%
definitely.
down to 1. Okay.
But if you're looking at a recession that's only 1 or 2%, that's not bad. Like I don't remember what COVID was when we first went into that, but that was pretty rough. That first period when everything shut down. Like I don't know what it was, but it was probably 15-20% overall.
And I'm going to guess recession is also limited to specific geographical areas. So like the US might be in a recession, but Canada might not be. Would that break down even smaller where Oklahoma could be in a recession, but Washington's not? Or is it pretty much all the nation together? Yeah,
they usually measure it based on nation states.
Okay.
So, and then I think, like there's areas in the U.S. if you look like by that metric have been in a recession for 3 or 4 decades. So it's, it's a technical term. Like, I don't really like the fact that there's not a clear definition on it from the government side, because I think it's important to have stuff like this not be politicized. And I'm not saying that it is. I think generally economists, or the economists that are involved in this sort of stuff, are as apolitical as they can be. But it could be wrong. But they're not like working for the White House or the Republican National Committee or anything like that.
Right. I can, like I said, just going back through history and thinking about different times and stuff, how recession was used politically by parties, but not necessarily by the people naming it the recession. So, Matt, the question is, are we actually in a recession right now, the United States? I
like, based on what I feel, what I've been following, and on that Atlanta Fed number, I would say that yes, we've been in a recession, and it just kind of, I think it's kind of like a tipping point here. There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of like pullback in spending plans, but at the same time, there's still basically, I think, 1.9 jobs available for every person that's looking for a job. So there's like, I think, still about 10 million jobs available. And granted, those don't necessarily always fit from geographic and skills areas, but there's still a lot of companies that are out there hiring. And it's, it just, I hate this phrase, but it is what it is, right? Like we've been kind of like drunken sailors the past couple of years, and now it's time to take some of the medicine.
So are the snooty snoots in Cambridge, are they calling it a recession yet?
I don't think so.
And for all those of you that are snooty snoots, you're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed our snazzy news intro. So since we recorded this last night before this and June's inflation report, I thought it would be good to mend this episode and have a little detail on it. The headline CPI was higher at 9.1 year over year versus the expectation of 8.8. The 1.3% month over month rise from May to June was the hottest since 2005, and overall inflation of 9.1 year over year is the hottest inflation number since 1981. So essentially, before we had the Volcker years, where Paul Volcker, the former Federal Reserve chairman, really ratcheted up interest rates to try to control inflation. So goods inflation is slowing, but services costs are soaring. Probably a lot of this is driven both by energy costs and wage inflation. So looking at this too, housing was really high, and transportation. So, you're seeing a lot of components where the energy prices factoring in with oil price in June has really pushed us higher. With that said, since oil and gasoline prices have fallen from June to July, one would think that this 9.1 year over year inflation number, when we have the July report mid-August, will show probably below the 8.8 level that we've had so far.
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover, If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.